Okay, so in this video, we're going to talk about the third type of noun clause, which derives from WH questions. So before we get to that, I want to do a quick review of what we mean when we say noun clause, which once again, I will abbreviate NC. So noun clauses refer to clauses that function like nouns. Okay. So that might be like subjects, subject complements, direct objects, objects of prepositional phrases, etc., right? So if a noun can fill the function, so too can a clause if it's functioning like a noun, or if we consider it to be a noun clause. Additionally, these types of clauses are essential for grammatically complete sentences, right? So it just means we cannot delete them and have the sentence still make grammatical sense. Okay. So there are a couple of key things that I want you to be aware of when we are talking about type 3 noun clauses. So we'll start by talking about those, and then I'll give you some examples to kind of localize what I mean. So first off, type 3 noun clauses come from WH questions. Okay. And so just remember that WH questions include the words why, when, how, where, who, and what. Okay. And each of these words can fill different functions. So what's important to remember is that the noun clause fills the function of the WH word in the original question. So for instance, subject, subject complement, adverb, etc. Right? So hold on to that because I'm going to show you or give you a couple of examples that I think will help localize what I mean when I'm talking about this. So I have three sentences. When he finished, I laughed. I asked about when he'd arrive. I contemplated who she was. So each of these three sentences contains one of the WH words that we talked about above. And each of them could be considered to respond to a WH question, right? So when he finished, I laughed. I might say, when did you laugh? Right? Well, when he finished, I laughed, right? Response to that question. I asked about when he'd arrive, right? I would probably say, what did you ask about? Right? And so response, I asked about when he'd arrive. Now, what you'll notice here that's quite interesting is when and what are different WH words. So we will come back to that in just a second. I contemplated who she was. This could be a response to a question. What did you contemplate? Right? Well, I contemplated who she was. Once again, you'll notice that we have who in the original sentence and what in the WH question. So here is why this matters. We're going to start with the questions first. If I say, when did you laugh? You is my subject. Um, did laugh is my predicate, right? So I have my subject and predicate. That means that when is a WH word that functions like an adverb. It's telling me when something happens. What that means or why that's important is because the noun phrase should fill the same function of this original WH word. So I is the subject, right? Laughed is my predicate. That makes sense as a sentence. When he finished provides additional information. And so it is actually a clause, so a noun clause, but it's a noun clause that's functioning like an adverb, right? Or it's filling that adverbial function. Now, this is going to be a little bit different than the sentence I asked about when he'd arrive. So if we look at our WH question, we have you as our subject, did ask as our predicate, right? Which leaves us with two words. We have about, which is a preposition, right? And what, which in this case is the object of that preposition, right? It's just a stranded preposition, so they're split apart from each other. So this is important because it means that even though in this original sentence we're using that same WH word when, we have our subject, our predicate, but then we have our preposition, which means that this entire clause functions as the object of that prepositional phrase, just like the what does, right? So just like this original WH word. So here, we could say like, I asked about the dog, right? We could sub in a whole noun. Instead, we have this whole clause, when he'd arrive is the clause, and that whole thing is taking the place of a single noun and functioning as the object of the preposition about. Okay. So even though both this example and the previous use when, one is functioning adverbially, one is functioning, right, like an object. Okay. So this is a noun clause that's functioning like an object. Lastly, we have, I contemplated who she was. So once again, let's look at the question. What did you contemplate? Well, you is the subject, did contemplate is our preposition, or sorry, our predicate. What then is going to function like a direct object, right? So that means I is our subject here, contemplated is our predicate, and then who she was is the entire thing that's being complicated. So it's contemplated, so it's a noun phrase, sorry, a noun clause, not a phrase, a clause, a noun clause that is functioning like a direct object. So in exactly the same way that that word, what is, in the original sentence, right? So the key here, much like the other forms of noun clauses that we've looked at, you have the same situation where you should just be able to replace the whole clause with a word like that or it, right? I contemplated it. If you can replace it with a simple pronoun or a simple noun, then probably what you have is a clause that is functioning like a noun, so a noun clause. So you could even say something like, I contemplated what, and that would change it into a question, and the what would fill that role, right, of the direct object. So they are intimately connected in that way. So when you're kind of thinking about grammar, and trying to deal with like more complicated sentences or sentences that have whole clauses that function the same way a single noun would, sometimes rearranging the sentence can help us to understand how words are operating or functioning. So replacing a whole clause with a single word, seeing if you can do that, testing it out can be really helpful, both I think for ourselves and for when we're working with students.